Pests don't stop just because it's harvest time, and as its name would tell you, the wheat stem sawfly can be a real pain in the neck for wheat farmers. Surveys earlier in the year even indicated an increase when compared to recent years. I sat down with UNL Extension entomologist Dr. Jeff Bradshaw to learn more about the insect. So what is it, and what do wheat farmers need to know?
Yeah, so the wheat stem sawfly is a small wasp, and what it does is it lays its egg into the wheat tillers, and as the larva develops inside, it causes damage to the wheat. And ultimately what happens is that sawfly forms a pupa inside of the wheat stem toward the base. It girdles the wheat tiller, and so this girdling can cause lodging if the weather conditions are right.
And I know it's been an issue in Montana, North Dakota, Canada. So when did it make its way to Nebraska? Kind of what's the history behind it?
Yeah, so it's a native pest, and it was actually first identified, I think, in the 1800s from Colorado. But it has a wide distribution throughout the U.S. There's been collections as far south as Louisiana. And it's been a pest in spring wheat for quite some time. And at some point in the 80s, early 90s, it started developing sort of a timeline, some changes with that insect in its population allowed it to adapt to winter wheat. And ever since that adaptation to winter wheat has occurred, it seemed to have started moving south and east with more intense population pressure. And particularly for Nebraska, we've seen increases in numbers that started right around 2012.
And I think you touched on this a little bit, but kind of go into more detail about how attack the wheat, is that the right word? How it attacks the wheat, or if there's a better word?
Well, I mean, I guess if you're a wheat plant, you feel pretty attacked.
Yeah.
So the adult insect, the female sawfly, she has an ovipositor that she uses to lay eggs inside the wheat stem. So she'll actually inject her egg inside the wheat stem. When the larva hatches, it'll feed inside of that hollow wheat stem. And through that feeding, it can cause yield loss and can cause quality issues with the grain in that wheat head from that tiller. As it moves down, as it develops, it will begin to girdle that stem, usually around the week of harvest or close to harvest. And so as it girdles it, in order to overwinter near the base of that plant, it has to form a little pupal chamber. And in the process of doing that, cuts the wheat plant. And if your infestation is large enough tillers are cut, you can have fairly severe lodging in the wheat field. And obviously lodged wheat can be really difficult to harvest.
Yeah, and I know that it really impacts dry land wheat. And as far as irrigated wheat, that can be impacted too though, right?
Yeah, there's no reason it shouldn't infest or can't infest irrigated wheat. We typically see the problem more pronounced in dryland systems, and we think that's because of the abundance of conventional wheat fallow rotation we have in our dryland systems, where that wheat residue is so valuable for moisture retention in soil, but that wheat residue is also where that insect is overwintering. So that can serve as a pretty good source for wheat stem sawfly the next year. Whereas in our irrigated systems, we don't have so much that conventional wheat fallow system. We have more crop diversity and different kinds of crops that are grown in those systems that make it a less viable, agro-ecosystem for that insect to survive in.
And I know that there's some pest management strategies that you guys are working on. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a really challenging insect to manage. We've looked at insecticides and both systemic and non-systemic insecticide options. And while some of our more conventional insecticides may work in that they, if you spray a wheat field that has sawflies in it, you will kill sawflies. But they emerge out of the wheat residue over about a 4 or 5 week period. So you get this constant influx of sawflies into your wheat field, and you can't afford in a system to spray weekly. That's really not an option.
Yeah, it's not feasible, sure.
And so, so what we've looked at, what seems to be the best strategy is resistant wheat. And so there are a small handful of wheats that are referred to as solid stem wheat. And so that's a wheat tiller that has a pith inside of it that's strongly expressed, so it's like a solid stem.
Right.
And what that does is the larva has a very difficult time developing and feeding inside of that solid stem material, whereas our conventional wheats are a hollow stem, and it's easier for that larva to move inside of that stem. Okay. And so the challenge with those solid stem wheats is that the commercially available ones that we have right now were developed in Montana. So they're developed for that more northern high plains climate and less adapted for our wheat growing region and more southern wheat growing regions. So I know that our wheat breeders both in Colorado and Nebraska are working pretty hard to try to introgress those traits, those solid stem traits, into some of our more elite lines so that we've got something that can yield well and resist that insect in the future.